Era Trails returns with another unforgettable journey. This time, the compass points northwest to a state that holds more contradictions per square mile than almost anywhere on the continent. One side of Washington receives over 140 inches of rain a year. The other barely scrapes 12. Between them, active volcanoes, temperate rainforests, fossils of subtropical trees, and basalt columns carved by the largest floods in known geologic history. We begin at the edge, the absolute northwestern tip of the contiguous United States, where the Pacific Ocean stops being a concept and becomes something you can hear before you can see it. From there, we move south along the Olympic Peninsula into old-growth forest so dense the forest floor never dries out. Then east through the Cascades, across the rain shadow, and into the interior plateau where Washington turns brown and volcanic and strange. We end where the mountains meet the city, at a waterfall that has been thundering over the same basalt lip since the last ice age. Let's go. The Pacific hits Cape Flattery from 3 directions at once. The Cape marks the northwestern corner of the contiguous United States, and because the Strait of Juan de Fuca opens to the east, while the open Pacific pushes from the west and north, the water here rarely settles. On calm days, the surface still moves in conflicting patterns, swells from different fetch directions arriving at angles, stacking against each other without ever fully resolving. The smell is kelp and cold salt, and something faintly sulphurous from the exposed intertidal rock. Maca Bay lies just to the south, and the Cedar Boardwalk Trail through Olympic National Park that leads to the Cape's viewpoints passes through a coastal forest of Sitka spruce and western red cedar that closes overhead within the first 100 yards. The headland itself is basalt, dark, dense, fractured into the kind of angular blocks that look deliberate but aren't. These flows belong to the Crescent Formation, a sequence of submarine and subaerial basalts that erupted offshore roughly 55 to 48 million years ago and accreted onto the edge of the North American plate as the oceanic crust carrying them subducted beneath the continent. What you're standing on was once the floor of the Pacific Ocean. The accretion process tilted, sheared, and stacked these basalts against the continental margin, which is why the rock at Cape Flattery dips at steep angles and shows heavy shearing along its contact zones. Sea stacks offshore, particularly the large one framing the sea cave directly below the main viewpoint, are remnants of the same formation, slightly more resistant to wave erosion than the rock around them. The intertidal zone below the Cape is one of the most diverse on the Washington coast. Purple sea urchins pack the rock pools in densities that can exceed several hundred per square meter. Sea urchins graze coralline algae and kelp holdfasts continuously. Where their numbers are high enough, they can strip a reef to bare rock. Bald eagles work the Cape's thermals regularly. And tufted puffins nest in burrows on the sea stack faces from April through August. Offshore, gray whales pass during spring migration, northbound from Baja California to the Bering Sea, close enough to the headland that the vapor column from their blows is visible from the viewpoint on still mornings. The Makah Nation has occupied this peninsula continuously for at least 3,500 years, with oral traditions extending the occupation considerably further. The Makah are the only native nation in the United States with a federally guaranteed treaty right to hunt whales, a right secured in the 1855 Treaty of Ebey, which the Makah negotiated specifically to retain it. The whaling tradition centers on the gray whale and involves a specialized canoe design, a harpoon system with mussel shell blades and elk sinew line, and a ceremonial preparation that begins months before the hunt. The Makah Cultural and Research Center in Ebey holds material from the Ozette archaeological site, a Makah village buried by a mudslide roughly 500 years ago and excavated beginning in 1970, including wooden boxes, woven baskets, and carved whale fin effigies that survived only because the anaerobic mud preserved organic material that would otherwise have decomposed completely. The built environment at Cape Flattery is minimal by design. The Makah tribal government manages access to the Cape and has deliberately kept infrastructure to a trailhead, a parking area, and the boardwalk, nothing more. The viewpoints are open platforms over the headland, and the sea stack with its sea cave is visible from the main platform without any interpretive signage in the sight line. That restraint is a management decision. The Makah recognized early that heavy infrastructure at Cape Flattery would shift the place from a natural headland to a tourist attraction, and they have held that line. A small access fee goes directly to trail maintenance. The Ebey community itself, about a mile and a half east of the Cape Access Road, remains a working fishing village. The harbor supports commercial halibut, salmon, and albacore fleets. The smell of the working waterfront is diesel and fish, not gift shops. The Cape resists the kind of legibility that most overlooks provide. There is no panoramic sweep, no single composition. The views are partial, angled, framed by spruce. You hear the surge below before you see it, and the sound, a low concussive rhythm against the basalt, continues after you've turned away. We leave the tip of the continent and follow U.S. Route 101 south, where the Olympic Peninsula's coast begins to open. The next stops are beaches, but not the kind that invite you to lie down. Rialto Beach starts with driftwood, not scattered logs, a full-scale wreckage of old-growth timber, trunks 4 and 5 feet in diameter, bleached silver by salt and sun, stacked along the high tide line like debris from some offshore disaster. Most of it came from rivers. The Quileute River meets the ocean less than a mile north of the main access point, and Rialto catches whatever the river and the tides decide not to take back. Walking the beach means climbing over and around timber that was a forest not long ago. The cobbles underfoot are loose and fist-sized, worn smooth from wave action. The footing is deliberate work. The geology here is the same accretionary wedge material as Cape Flattery, but expressed differently. Rialto Beach exposes the Hoh assemblage, a chaotic melange of Eocene-age deep-sea sediments, oceanic basalts, and chert that was scraped off the subducting Juan de Fuca plate and accreted onto the Olympic Peninsula over roughly 55 to 35 million years of subduction. Melange is the right word. The rock is structurally incoherent, showing blocks of one lithology floating in a matrix of another, with no clear stratigraphic order. On the beach, this appears as highly contorted mudstone and sandstone formations in the sea cliffs south of the access point, with irregular veins of lighter-colored chert cutting through darker mudstone at acute angles. The sea stacks offshore, hole in the wall, about 1.5 miles north along the beach, are erosional remnants of the same formation. Hole in the wall is a natural arch punched through a sea stack by wave action along a fracture zone in the rock. The intertidal life at Rialto is dense and well documented. Sea stars. The ochre sea star, keystone predator of this intertidal zone, had collapsed to near absence along much of the Pacific Northwest coast after 2013 due to sea star wasting syndrome, a pathogen-linked disease that liquefied the animals within days of showing symptoms. Rialto Beach's population began showing partial recovery by the early 2020s, which gave marine ecologists a reference site for tracking the syndrome's long-term effects on community structure. In the sea star's absence, the California mussel beds they historically controlled expanded dramatically. The slow return of sea stars is now gradually recompressing those mussel beds. Black oyster catchers move along the rocky outcrops at low tide, their orange bills working mussels off the rock face. The call is a sharp, carrying shriek. It carries over surf noise without effort. The Quileute Nation holds La Push, the village at the mouth of the Quileute River, immediately north of Rialto Beach, and has occupied this coast for thousands of years. Their oral history describes the Quileute as descended from wolves transformed into humans, a story encoded in the tribe's name and in the wolf imagery that appears throughout their material culture. The Quileute ran a significant sea mammal hunting economy, targeting northern fur seals, Calorinus or Sinus, and harbor seals, Phoca vitulina, alongside salmon. Their canoes, the same high-prow, ocean-going design shared by other Olympic Peninsula nations, were built from western red cedar and could handle open Pacific swells. The village of La Push today sits on a small reservation bordered on three sides by Olympic National Park federal land, which has constrained the Quileute's ability to build above the tsunami inundation zone, a practical and ongoing safety problem that the tribe spent over a decade lobbying Congress to address. Legislation finally passed in 2012, allowing a land swap to provide higher ground. Rialto Beach itself has no development beyond a parking lot and vault toilets. The park boundary is the high tide line. Between the driftwood piles and the surf, there is no built infrastructure whatsoever. No boardwalk, no interpretive panels on the beach, nothing anchored to the ground that the next king tide won't rearrange anyway. A mile south, the coast changes character again. Ruby Beach holds something different in its rock. The name comes from garnet. Small ruby-red garnet crystals weather out of the sea cliffs at Ruby Beach and collect in the coarse sand, giving the upper beach a faint reddish tint under direct light. The garnets are accessory minerals in the metamorphic rocks of the Olympic Peninsula's interior, transported to the coast by rivers and redistributed by longshore drift. They are not gemstone grade, not particularly large. Most are a millimeter or two across, but in concentration, they are visible. Bend down and look at the wet sand in the upper swash zone, and you will see them. The coastal rock at Ruby Beach is part of the same Hoh assemblage melange that appears at Rialto, but the exposure here is more varied. The sea stacks at Ruby Beach, there are several, scattered offshore at low tide, show an unusually clear display of pillow basalt, rounded, bulbous lava structures that form when molten rock extrudes directly into seawater, and the outer surface chills instantly while the interior remains fluid. The pillow structures at Ruby Beach are Eocene in age, 50 to 55 million years old, and the stacking of individual pillows is visible in cross-section on the wave-cut faces of the stacks. Each pillow has a glassy outer rind from rapid quenching and a more crystalline interior where cooling was slower. The beach sits at the southern end of an 11-mile stretch of roadless Olympic National Park coastline, and the wildlife reflects the reduced human pressure. River otters move between the creek mouths and the intertidal zone. They are saltwater capable despite the river designation and regularly forage kelp beds and rocky reefs for fish and crustaceans. Marbled murrelets, a seabird listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, commute between Ruby Beach and old-growth forest up to 50 miles inland, where they nest directly on large moss-covered branches without building any structure. The murrelet's commute is one of the stranger ecological arrangements on the Pacific coast, a seabird that spends its ocean life diving for Pacific herring and its nesting life in interior old growth. The loss of old growth to logging through the second half of the 20th century hit marbled murrelet populations harder than any direct ocean impact. The coast here was used by several Olympic Peninsula nations, the Quinault to the south, the Quileute to the north, as a seasonal resource corridor. Archaeological evidence of shell middens and fish weir remnants appears at several creek mouths along this stretch of coast, though most sites remain partially or fully unexcavated. Formal documentation accelerated after the 1970s when federal land management obligations under the National Historic Preservation Act required systematic survey. There is no settlement at Ruby Beach, and there never has been in the post-contact period. The access road from US 101 is short and steep, the parking area is small, and the walk to the beach takes less than 5 minutes. Visitation is high in summer but compressed into a narrow daily window around low tide when the sea stacks are accessible on foot and the tide pools are exposed. We stay on 101 South and follow the coast to a tree that should not exist. The Kalaloch tree of life is a Sitka spruce that has grown for an estimated 100 years or more, with most of its root system fully exposed. The bluff it grows on has eroded almost entirely away beneath it. The bank has been undercut by a small creek that drains to the beach, and the tree now bridges the gap between what remains of the bluff on either side, its roots hanging in open air over the creek channel below. The roots that do reach soil are on the bluff edges to either side. The trunk is upright. The tree is alive and continues to produce new growth each year. The spruce at Kalaloch is not the only tree on the Olympic coast growing on an eroding bank, but it is the most extreme case of root exposure while still maintaining canopy viability. The tree's survival depends on a few roots, reaching enough mineral soil and moisture on the stable bluff remnants, and on the Sitka spruce's particular tolerance for saline wind, wet conditions, and mechanical stress. Sitka spruce is the dominant canopy species on the Olympic coast precisely because it handles coastal exposure that kills most other conifers, heavy salt spray, sustained wind, waterlogged soils. The bluff is unconsolidated glacier-marine drift, a mix of sand, silt, and cobbles deposited when the ice sheets retreated roughly 15,000 to 17,000 years ago, and relative sea levels were different. It erodes quickly. The creek undercutting the base of the Tree of Life's bluff has been doing so for long enough that the tree's root structure has had to adapt progressively, growing longer, lateral roots to span the increasing gap and continue reaching the diminishing soil on the flanks. The roots are visually dramatic, gray, thick as forearms in places, arching downward from the base of the trunk across the open air of the creek canyon. The Kalaloch area is managed by Olympic National Park as part of its coastal strip. The lodge, campground, and ranger station cluster near the mouth of Kalaloch Creek, about a mile north of the Tree of Life. The site itself has no signage, no barrier, and no platform. It is accessed via a short scramble down the bank. People have left offerings in the roots, small stones, flowers, and handwritten notes. The Park Service does not remove them. In a 2014 storm, a significant portion of the bluff beneath the tree collapsed after heavy rainfall saturated the drift deposits. The tree survived. The gap in the bluff widened, the roots spanning it lengthened by necessity. It appears to be a process the tree can continue indefinitely, or until the remaining bluff flanks erode past the point where any route can reach them. No one knows which is closer. From here we turn inland into the forest that created the conditions for this kind of tree in the first place. Rainfall at the Hoh Rain Forest averages between 140 and 170 inches per year, up to 14 feet of precipitation. This is not metaphorical abundance. It is a measurable input that drives one of the most productive temperate ecosystems on Earth. The dominant trees, Sitka spruce, western red cedar, western hemlock, big-leaf maple, grow to dimensions that are disorienting. Western red cedars with trunk diameters over 10 feet. Sitka spruces exceeding 300 feet in height. Big-leaf maples whose branches carry so much epiphytic moss that the moss itself adds measurable weight to the structure of the tree. The forest floor smells of decomposing wood and wet soil, and a faint sweetness from the mosses, a damp, cool smell that does not exist in drier climates. The Hoh Rain Forest occupies the valley of the Hoh River, which drains the western flank of the Olympic Mountains to the Pacific Ocean. The valley's orientation, roughly east-west, channels moisture-laden air off the Pacific directly into the mountains, where orographic lift cools and condenses it as rain. This mechanism has operated since the end of the last glaciation, roughly 15,000 years ago, when the Olympic Peninsula's river valleys became ice-free and vegetation colonized the newly exposed glacial till. The old-growth forest that stands today began regenerating then. The largest trees are measured in centuries. Some Sitka spruce and western red cedar individuals in the valley exceed 500 years in age. The ecological architecture of this forest is stratified. The canopy belongs to spruce and hemlock. Below that, big-leaf maple forms a secondary layer, its branches draped with club moss, and licorice fern in continuous curtains. The ground layer is dominated by oxalis, ferns, and a dense mat of mosses. Over 130 species of moss have been identified in the Hoh Valley. Nurse logs function as the primary seed bed. Fallen western red cedar and Sitka spruce trunks, too rot-resistant to decompose quickly, hold moisture and organic material long enough for hemlock seedlings to establish. A century-old hemlock stand can sometimes be seen growing in a straight line, the ghost of a nurse log that has long since rotted away beneath the roots. The Roosevelt elk is the largest subspecies of North American elk and was named after Theodore Roosevelt following his establishment of Olympic National Monument in 1909. Partly to protect the elk from market hunting, which had reduced populations severely by the turn of the 20th century. Roosevelt elk in the Hoh Valley are not trophy animals performing for cameras. They move through the forest in herds of 20 to 60 animals, their hooves audible on the damp ground before you see them. During the rut in September and October, bull elk produce a bugle, a rising whistle that breaks into a lower bellow that carries clearly through the valley, even in rain. The Hoh herd is among the largest non-migratory Roosevelt elk populations in the range. The Hoh Valley was inhabited seasonally by the Hoh tribe, a small nation closely related linguistically and culturally to the Quileute, who hunted elk in the upper valley and fished the river for Chinook salmon, which still make their spawning run up the Hoh River each fall. The tribe holds a small reservation at the river's mouth. The valley itself entered Olympic National Park in 1938, which ended commercial elk hunting and initiated the old-growth protection that now makes the Hoh one of the few temperate rainforest valleys in the Northern Hemisphere, where the complete suite of large vertebrates, elk, black bear, cougar, beaver, remains intact. The Hoh's visitor infrastructure is modest for the ecological significance of the place. A visitor center, 2 loop trails, and a road to the base of the Blue Glacier route on Mount Olympus. Most of the valley is accessible only on foot. We leave the rainforest and cross the Strait of Juan de Fuca in direction not by water, but by driving north and catching the ferry to reach a place where 2 empires tried to share an island and couldn't quite manage it. San Juan Island sits in the Strait of Juan de Fuca between the Olympic Peninsula and Vancouver Island, and for a brief period in the mid-19th century, it was the contested center of a boundary dispute that nearly brought the United States and Britain to open war over a pig. The pig in question belonged to the Hudson's Bay Company. An American settler named Lyman Cutler shot it in 1859 after it rooted up his garden. The British threatened to arrest Cutler. American soldiers arrived, British warships arrived, both sides dug in. The confrontation lasted 12 years without a single military engagement and became known as the Pig War. The boundary was finally settled by international arbitration in 1872. The San Juan Islands awarded to the United States, and both camps were abandoned. San Juan Island National Historical Park preserves both camps. American Camp on the island's southern tip and English Camp on the northern shore of Garrison Bay. They are about 15 miles apart and feel nothing alike. American Camp sits on open, windswept prairie grassland above a dramatic stretch of shoreline. English Camp is sheltered in a forested cove with a formal garden still maintained in front of the officers' barracks. The British, apparently, brought their horticultural standards along with their warships. The island's geology is different from the Olympic Peninsula coast. San Juan Island is underlain by rocks of the San Juan Thrust System, a complex of Mesozoic age terrains, some oceanic and some continental in origin, that were stacked together by thrust, faulting roughly 80 to 100 million years ago. The resistant metamorphic and igneous rocks that dominate the southern half of the island give it its elevated, irregular topography, while the northern half is lower and more sediment-covered. American Camp's prairie, an unusual grassland on an island this far north, exists because the southern tip of the island sits on well-drained glacial outwash. and because historical grazing by the Hudson's Bay Company's sheep operation cleared the original forest and prevented its return. That prairie is now critical habitat for the island marble butterfly, a subspecies thought extinct until its rediscovery on San Juan Island in 1998. The island marble butterfly was last recorded in the 1800s and was believed lost with the native prairie habitats of the Pacific Northwest. Its survival on San Juan Island depends entirely on the persistence of the American camp prairie and the continued presence of its larval host plants, native mustards, particularly field mustard and rock cress. The National Park Service now manages the prairie specifically around island marble butterfly habitat requirements, including invasive grass removal and targeted grazing to maintain the open structure the butterfly requires. The Lummi and Saanich peoples used San Juan Island extensively for camas harvesting and salmon processing before European contact. The Hudson's Bay Company established Bellevue Farm on the island's southern end in 1851 as a sheep operation serving the fur trade network, the same operation whose pig started the diplomatic crisis 8 years later. The farm's stone lime kilns, used to process lime from the island's shell middens for export to San Francisco's construction boom, still stand at American Camp. We recross to the mainland and turn south along the coast to find a landscape that looks rural, but sits at the center of one of the most consequential land tenure stories in Washington history. Ebey's Landing on Whidbey Island is the first National Historical Reserve established in the United States, a designation created specifically for Ebey's Landing in 1978, precisely because the place did not fit any existing category. It is not a park. It is not a monument. It is a working agricultural and residential landscape that has been continuously farmed since 1850, and the federal designation exists to preserve that continuity rather than to freeze it. The reserve covers roughly 17,000 acres on the central and northern portion of Whidbey Island, incorporating active farms, private residences, a small town, Coupeville, historic military fortifications, and the shoreline bluffs above Admiralty Inlet. The land along Ebey's prairie has been in continuous cultivation longer than any other European settled agricultural site in Washington. Some of the farms operating there today are on the same parcels homesteaded in the 1850s. The landscape's agricultural character is rooted in geology. Ebey's prairie sits on glacial outwash and till deposited by the Puget Lobe of the Cordilleran ice sheet, which retreated from Whidbey Island roughly 13,500 years ago. The till soils are deep, moderately well-drained and fertile, an unusual combination on an island in the rain shadow of the Olympic Mountains, which keeps annual precipitation here around 20 inches, low enough for dry land grain farming. The Skagit and Snohomish people harvested camas on the prairie long before European settlement, burning periodically to maintain the open grassland and stimulate camas bulb production. Colonel Isaac Ebey, for whom the reserve is named, arrived in 1850, filed one of the first Donation Land Claim Act claims in the territory, and was killed by a Haida raiding party in 1857 in retaliation for an earlier U.S. naval engagement. The event was not an isolated frontier incident. Haida and Tlingit raids on Puget Sound settlements were a recurring feature of the 1850s, driven by a complex of grievances related to disrupted trade networks, epidemic disease mortality, and the destabilization of the northern coastal economies by the maritime fur trade's collapse. Ebey's farmhouse has not survived. His blockhouse, built the same year he was killed, still stands near the reserve's central prairie. Coupeville, the reserve's main settlement, preserves one of the largest concentrations of Victorian-era commercial and residential architecture in Washington. The town's waterfront is dominated by a wharf built in 1905 that was used for grain shipping well into the 20th century. The central Whidbey Island farming landscape, visible from the bluff trails above Ebey's Landing as a broad patchwork of hay fields and pasture extending to the water, looks from the bluff much as it did in historic photographs from the 1880s and 1890s. The reserve functions only as long as working agriculture remains economically viable for the families holding the land. The National Park Service does not own most of it. Development pressure on Whidbey Island has increased steadily, and the reserve's tools for resisting it, easements, zoning cooperation with Island County, and voluntary seller preference programs, are slower moving than the real estate market. The landscape persists, but the margin is not comfortable. From Whidbey Island, we cross back to the mainland and turn east into the mountains. The North Cascades are the most heavily glaciated range in the contiguous United States outside of Alaska. The park holds over 300 glaciers, more than any other American national park south of the Alaska Range. This is not a legacy figure from a colder era. These glaciers exist because the North Cascades intercept Pacific moisture at elevations high enough and at latitudes far enough north that net accumulation has historically exceeded summer melt. That balance is now shifting. Every glacier in the range is retreating, some dramatically. Blue Glacier on Mount Olympus has lost roughly a quarter of its volume since systematic measurement began. In the North Cascades, Coleman Glacier on Mount Baker retreated over 2,600 feet between 1979 and 2019. The rock making up these peaks is among the most complex in Washington. The North Cascades contain a mosaic of terrains, fragments of ancient ocean floor, volcanic arcs, and continental crust assembled by accretion and overprinted by repeated metamorphism and plutonic intrusion. Some of the metamorphic rocks in the core of the range, the Skagit Gneiss complex, date to roughly 90 million years ago and experience temperatures and pressures consistent with deep crustal burial, then were exhumed rapidly by erosion and tectonic extension. The result is a mountain range where a billion-year-old metamorphic basement rock sits adjacent to much younger volcanic material, all cut through by tertiary-age granite plutons that make up the pale, massive cliff faces visible on peaks like Good Mountain and Mount Shuksan. Cascade mountain goats, the mountain goat, move along cliff faces that would require technical climbing gear for a human. Their feet are adapted for this. The outer hooves are hard-edged for gripping rock edges. The inner pads are soft and concave, functioning like suction cups on smooth faces. Mountain goats have been documented free-climbing vertical gains of over 1,500 feet in single movements to access mineral licks. Gray wolves recolonized the North Cascades naturally from Canada in the 1990s after decades of absence, and packs now range through the range's backcountry. American black bear densities in the North Cascades are among the highest in Washington, supported by the park's exceptional berry crop, huckleberry, salmonberry, and thimbleberry in late summer. The Upper Skagit, Sauk Suiattle, and Nlaka'pamux peoples use the passes and valleys of the North Cascades for trade and travel for thousands of years. The range was not a barrier but a network. Summer passes linked the wet western valleys to the dry interior plateau, and the routes were well established long before European contact. Ross Lake and Diablo Lake in the Skagit Valley floor were flooded in the first half of the 20th century when Seattle City Light dammed the Skagit River in 3 stages: Gorge Dam, 1924, Diablo Dam, 1930, and Ross Dam, 1949, creating the hydroelectric system that still supplies a significant portion of Seattle's electricity. The dams displaced Upper Skagit communities and submerged valley bottomland that had been inhabited and farmed. North Cascades National Park itself, established in 1968, does not include the dam complex, which sits in the adjacent Ross Lake National Recreation Area. The park boundary is drawn to exclude the reservoirs. The result is an unusual administrative patchwork: Wilderness National Park on the high terrain, active hydroelectric infrastructure in the valley floors. Just below Ross Dam, one of the most unusually colored lakes in the Pacific Northwest is waiting. Diablo Lake is turquoise, not metaphorically, not under certain light conditions, turquoise consistently throughout the summer months, in a way that does not look like a North American mountain lake and prompts most first-time visitors to wonder if the color is altered in photographs. It is not. The color comes from glacial flour, particles of rock ground to powder by the glaciers on Colonial Peak, Snowfield Peak, and Pyramid Peak above the lake, and carried into the water by glacial meltwater streams. The particles are fine enough to stay suspended in the water column rather than sinking, and they scatter sunlight in the blue-green wavelengths while absorbing red. The concentration of glacial flour is highest in mid to late summer when melt rates peak, which is when the turquoise color is most intense. Diablo Lake is a reservoir impounded by Diablo Dam, which Seattle City Light completed in 1930. The dam is an arch-gravity design 389 feet tall, at the time of its completion, the tallest dam in the world. The original construction required building a rail line through the Skagit Gorge to move materials and workers, an engineering project that took longer than the dam itself. The powerhouse at the base of Diablo Dam still generates electricity. Diablo feeds into Gorge Reservoir below, which feeds the final powerhouse in the three-dam cascade. The geology visible from the Diablo Lake overlook on State Route 20, the North Cascades Highway, displays the range's structural complexity clearly. The dark, banded rock of Colonial Peak directly across the lake is part of the Skagit Gneiss, 90-million-year-old metamorphic rock that was once sedimentary material buried to depths exceeding 25 miles and cooked under pressures that partially melted it. The pale gray intrusions cutting through it are younger granitic material that punched through during a separate tectonic episode. The lake sits in a glacially carved valley. The U-shaped cross-section of the valley walls, above the waterline, is the signature of glacial erosion rather than the V-shaped notch that rivers cut. Osprey nest on the snags and cliff ledges above Diablo Lake and fish the reservoir throughout summer. Osprey are the only raptors, other than bald eagles, that plunge entirely into the water when hunting. They hit the surface feet first, from heights of up to 130 feet, and their feet have barbed, reversible outer toes specifically adapted for gripping wet, slippery fish. Common loons use the reservoir during migration. The depth and cold of the glacial meltwater suppress the algae blooms that plague warmer reservoirs, keeping Diablo Lake's water transparent enough that osprey can spot fish from height. The small settlement of Diablo, a company town built by Seattle City Light for dam workers with a hotel, recreation hall, and powerhouse, still exists as a minimal community of about 24 residents. The Diablo Lake Resort operates summer boat tours of the reservoir. The town's isolation is complete. State Route 20 closes east of New Harlem in winter, when snowpack makes the road impassable, typically from November through April, and Diablo is accessible by no other road. The North Cascades Highway east of Diablo climbs toward Washington Pass at 5,477 feet and descends into the Methow Valley, a landscape entirely unlike the glacier-hung peaks we just left. The Methow Valley on the eastern slope of the Cascades receives about 12 inches of precipitation annually, less than a tenth of what falls on the Hoh Rain Forest 80 miles to the west. The rain shadow cast by the North Cascades is that abrupt. The vegetation changes within a few miles of Washington Pass. The western hemlock and Sitka spruce disappear, replaced by ponderosa pine and bunchgrass. The soil goes from dark and organic to thin and sandy. The light changes quality. Winthrop, the main town in the Methow Valley, sits at 1,760 feet elevation on the Methow River and has a main street that looks like a western frontier town because it was rebuilt as one in the early 1970s when a Washington State University graduate named Owen Weister a relative of the novelist who wrote The Virginian, invested in renovating the town's commercial buildings in a uniform Western architectural style to attract tourism after the highway opened. The western facade conceals a genuine history. The Methau Valley was populated by the Methau people, a Salishan-speaking group who occupied the valley and the adjacent uplands for thousands of years before contact, subsisting on salmon from the Methau and Columbia rivers, deer, elk, and root crops, including biscuit root and bitter root. Fort Okanagan, established by the Pacific Fur Company in 1811 near the confluence of the Okanagan and Columbia rivers, was the first American trading post established west of the Rocky Mountains. The fur trade disrupted Methau trade networks significantly within 2 decades of first contact. The geology of the Methau Valley is dominated by the Methau Basin, a Cretaceous age sedimentary sequence that accumulated in a 4-arc basin on the western margin of North America between roughly 130 and 90 million years ago. The sandstones, siltstones, and conglomerates of this sequence are visible in road cuts along State Route 20, tilted at steep angles by subsequent tectonic deformation. The Methau River cuts through these sediments on its way south to the Columbia, and the river's gravel bars are a mix of clasts derived from the sedimentary basin rocks and from the igneous and metamorphic rocks of the ranges to the west and north. Winthrop's ecological context is ponderosa pine forest and sagebrush steppe. White-tailed deer are common in the valley bottom. Mule deer range the upland slopes. Peregrine falcons nest on the cliff faces above the valley. The Methau has one of the denser nesting concentrations in inland Washington. The Methau River runs clear enough in late summer to see the bottom through 2 feet of water, and Chinook salmon still make the run up the Methau from the Columbia each fall, though the numbers are a fraction of what they were before the Columbia River dams altered migration timing and juvenile survival rates. Winthrop now operates primarily as an outdoor recreation gateway, cross-country skiing on the Methau Valley Sport Trail system in winter, 120 miles of groomed Nordic trails, the largest such system in North America, and mountain biking, hiking, and river sports in summer. The wooden boardwalks, hitching posts, and painted false fronts of the main street coexist without irony, alongside a robust craft beer and local food culture that serves the resort population. We follow the Methau River south to where it joins the Columbia, then turn southeast toward a lake that is a geographic anomaly by any measure. Lake Chelan is 55 miles long, up to 1,486 feet deep, and its surface sits at 1,079 feet above sea level. That means its bottom, at maximum depth, is 407 feet below sea level, making Lake Chelan one of the deepest lakes in North America and the deepest in the contiguous United States. The lake occupies a glacially carved fjord valley in the Cascade Mountains, and its depth is the direct result of the valley's tectonic and glacial history, a pre-existing fault valley that was repeatedly occupied and deepened by glacial tongues flowing east out of the Cascades during successive Pleistocene glaciations over roughly the past 2 million years. The glacier that occupied the valley during the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, was thick enough that the valley floor at the current lake's upper end was carved 400 feet below present sea level. The lake's orientation, northwest to southeast, placed it in the path of the dominant ice flow direction. The result is a bathtub shape, steep walls, a flat to gently sloping floor, and a terminal moraine dam at the southeast end near the town of Chelan that raised the lake's outlet elevation and is the reason the lake's surface is as high as it is. Without that moraine dam, the lake would drain more completely. The upper third of Lake Chelan, the Stehekin end, sits inside the Lake Chelan National Recreation Area and is accessible only by passenger ferry from Chelan town, by float plane, or on foot over Cascade passes. There is no road to Stehekin. The village there has a permanent population of under 100 people, a bakery, a general store, and a school. It is one of the most isolated permanent communities in the contiguous United States. The ferry, operated by the Lake Chelan Boat Company, has served Stehekin since 1892 and remains the supply line for everything from grocery deliveries to construction materials. The water clarity of Lake Chelan is exceptional. Visibility exceeds 70 feet in the upper lake, a function of the steep, sparsely vegetated granite catchment that delivers very little dissolved nutrient load, keeping algae populations suppressed. The deepest zones of the lake support almost no biological productivity. Lake Chelan is ultra-oligotrophic, essentially nutrient-starved, which is why the water is intensely blue rather than green. Bull trout, a cold water specialist listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, persists in the deep cold water of the upper lake. Bull trout require water temperatures below 55 degrees Fahrenheit for spawning and cannot tolerate the sediment loading that typically accompanies development in mountain watersheds. Their continued presence in Lake Chelan reflects the near-complete undevelopment of the upper drainage. The Chelan people, a band of the Salishin-speaking Mithao-Okanagan complex, occupied the lake's shores for thousands of years, fishing the lake for its native trout populations and the Chelan River for salmon. The Chelan were forcibly relocated to the Colville Reservation following the treaties of the 1850s and subsequent executive orders. The town of Chelan, at the lake's southeastern end, developed as an agricultural service center for the surrounding orchards. The Chelan Basin is one of the premier apple-growing regions in Washington, supported by the dry, sunny climate east of the Cascades and the availability of irrigation water from the lake. Apple warehouses and cold storage facilities still operate at the lake's outlet. The transition from the wilderness character of the upper lake to the orchard and resort economy of the lower lake covers 55 miles of water, but it covers a century of land use history just as clearly. The Enchantments is a high alpine basin in the Stewart Range of the Cascade Mountains, sitting between 7,800 and 9,500 feet elevation in the Alpine Lakes wilderness. The permit system that controls access allows roughly 60 overnight visitors per day in the core zone during the summer season, a number calibrated against a lottery that receives over 50,000 applications annually. Most people who apply do not get in. The ones who do reach a landscape of glacially polished granite basins, ice-blue tarns, and larch forests that exist at this elevation almost nowhere else in the range. The rock throughout the Enchantments is the Mount Stuart batholith, a mass of tonalite and granodiorite that crystallized from a magma body roughly 96 million years ago at depth, then was exhumed by erosion over tens of millions of years. Tonalite is a coarser-grained igneous rock than granite, paler than the dark metamorphic rock surrounding it, and its surface weathers into rounded, smooth-faced domes and slabs rather than the sharp ridgelines produced by metamorphic rock. The glacial polish on these slabs is still visible. The ice that occupied this basin during the Pleistocene dragged rock debris across the bedrock surface, grinding it to a smoothness that still reflects light when wet. Scattered across the polished slabs are erratic boulders, carried and deposited by the glacier from elsewhere in the drainage. The subalpine larch is the defining tree of the Upper Enchantment Zone, and it is the only deciduous conifer native to the Cascades. In October, the needles turn from green to gold before dropping, a brief window, typically 10 days to 2 weeks, when the high basin turns amber and the contrast against the pale granite and the dark tarns is sharp enough to draw photographers who otherwise have no interest in mountaineering. The larch grows at elevations where no other tree survives the combination of heavy snow load, short growing season, and desiccating wind. Its needles emerge late in spring and drop early in fall, spending as little time as possible exposed to winter conditions. Individual trees at this elevation may be several hundred years old, with trunk diameters of only a few inches. American picas occupy the talus slopes throughout the basin. Picas do not hibernate. They spend summer cutting and drying vegetation in small hay piles under rock overhangs, caching enough dry grass and forbs to survive under the snowpack all winter. They are acutely sensitive to heat. Picas cannot thermoregulate effectively above 78 degrees Fahrenheit and will die from heat stress within hours at sustained temperatures above that threshold. In the Cascades, pica populations have been retreating to higher elevations as summer temperatures rise, and the Enchantments, already near the upper limit of available elevation, offers limited room for further upslope retreat. Picas are not yet listed under the Endangered Species Act, but their status is periodically reviewed. The Wenatchee people use the passes adjacent to the Stuart Range as trade routes between the Columbia Plateau and the Western Cascades. Obsidian from sources in the Oregon Cascades has been recovered from archaeological sites west of the Stuart Range, confirming long-distance trade movement through these passes. The Alpine Lakes Wilderness designation, 1976, closed the upper basin to the grazing that had degraded it through the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when sheep were driven to the high meadows each summer. Recovery of the meadow vegetation, Subalpine buckwheat, cascade aster, spreading phlox, has been slow but measurable over the 5 decades since grazing ended. We descend from the Cascades and cross the Columbia River, moving east into a landscape defined not by ice that is still here, but by floods that ended 13,000 years ago. Dry Falls is a horseshoe-shaped cliff face 3.5 miles wide and 400 feet tall, standing in the middle of the Columbia Plateau scrubland. No river runs over it. The channel below it is dry. The scale of the feature is disorienting until the geology is explained, and even then, it takes a moment to process. Dry Falls was once the largest waterfall in the known geologic record, not by height, but by volume. During the Missoula floods, between roughly 18,000 and 13,000 years ago, water moved through this channel at an estimated flow rate of 386 million cubic feet per second, roughly 65 times the combined flow of all rivers currently on Earth. The Missoula floods were not a single event. Geologists estimate they occurred somewhere between 40 and 100 times over a period of several thousand years. Each flood was triggered by the same mechanism. A glacial ice dam at Glacier Lake, Missoula in present-day Montana failed repeatedly as the Cordilleran ice sheet advanced and retreated, releasing a lake holding up to 500 cubic miles of water. That water moved southwest across the Columbia Plateau in a wave estimated at over 800 feet deep in the confined canyon sections, stripping away everything above the basalt bedrock and carving the channeled scablands, the braided, canyon-cut landscape that covers much of eastern Washington today. Dry Falls was the head of one of those flood channels. The cataract migrated upstream as the floods eroded the basalt lip, the same process that makes Niagara Falls retreat upstream, only operating at a velocity and volume that moved the Dry Falls head roughly 20 miles upstream in the course of the flood episodes. The basalt being eroded is the Columbia River Basalt Group. Flood basalts erupted between 17 and 6 million years ago from fissure vents in eastern Washington and Oregon, stacking lava flows up to 2 miles thick across the plateau. The columnar jointing visible in the cliff face at Dry Falls developed as each flow cooled and contracted. The interpretive center at Dry Falls, perched directly on the canyon rim, is one of the better geology museum operations in Washington state. The exhibits explain the flood mechanism with scale models and water flow visualizations that make the volume credible. Below the rim, the canyon floor now holds a series of small lakes, sun lakes, that formed in the scour pits left by the flood's plunge pool action at the base of the falls. Western grebes breed on sun lakes and perform their courtship run, both birds racing side by side across the water surface for distances up to 65 feet, feet churning, bodies nearly vertical in late spring. It is one of the more improbable spectacles in Washington wildlife. The Spokane and Colville peoples knew this landscape as a fishing corridor. The Columbia and its tributaries through the Scablands carried enormous salmon runs before the 20th century dam network altered migration. The Dry Falls Canyon would have been a landmark of obvious significance, a cliff face 3 miles wide, visible from miles across the plateau, marking the transition between upland and river corridor. From the Scablands, we drop south to find a site where the basalt holds something older than the floods. Blue Lake Rhino Cave is a lava tube in the basalt cliffs above Blue Lake in the channeled Scablands, and it contains a cast, a natural mold, of a Miocene-age rhinoceros. The story of how it got there is one of the more specific geological coincidences in Washington. Roughly 15 million years ago, a lava flow from the Columbia River basalt group advanced across a landscape that still carried large mammals. A rhinoceros, identified as Diceritherium, a hornless, tapir-like North American species that stood about 4 feet at the shoulder, died or was caught by the flow. The carcass, or part of it, was engulfed by cooling basalt before it fully decomposed. The organic material burned away. What remained was a void in the rock exactly the shape of the animal's hide and body surface. The cast is in the ceiling of the cave. The rhino was on the ground when the lava flowed over it, so the underside of the flow hardened around the upper surface of the carcass. When geologists investigated the cave in the 1930s, they found the impression clearly enough preserved to identify the species. Bones from the same individual found separately confirmed the identification. The cave is accessible by a short trail from the Blue Lake parking area in Sun Lake's Dry Falls State Park. The basalt surrounding the rhino cast shows the layered structure typical of individual Columbia River basalt group flows, a vesicular, rubbly top zone where gas escaped as the lava cooled, a dense, columnar middle zone, and a basal zone where the flow moved across the pre-existing surface. The rhino impression is in the basal zone, consistent with the animal having been on the ground when overrun. The lava tube itself formed in the same flow. The outer surfaces cooled and solidified, while molten rock continued flowing through the interior, eventually draining out and leaving the hollow tube. Blue Lake below the cave is a scour lake, like the Sun Lakes at Dry Falls, occupying a depression eroded by the Missoula floods into the basalt plateau. The lake's blue-green color comes from its depth and the absence of significant algae load. White pelicans stage on Blue Lake during spring and fall migration. The spectacle of white pelicans on an inland Washington lake against basalt cliffs, with the rhino cast in the cliff above them, is a reasonable summary of how geologically layered this landscape is. We follow the Columbia Plateau west to where the basalt holds a different kind of fossil record. Ginkgo Petrified Forest State Park preserves one of the most diverse assemblages of petrified wood in the world, over 200 species of fossil trees identified from a single geological deposit. This is unusual. Most petrified forest sites preserve 1 or 2 dominant species from a single forest type. Ginkgo preserves material from what appears to have been a mixed subtropical to temperate forest that existed on the Columbia Plateau roughly 15 million years ago, including species no longer found in North America: dawn redwood, katsura, and, most strikingly, ginkgo, the living fossil tree now found naturally only in small populations in central China. The presence of ginkgo in a 15-million-year-old Washington deposit means the species survived in Asia after its disappearance from North America during a subsequent cooling period, a small detail with large implications for biogeography. The preservation mechanism was the same lava flows responsible for the Rhino at Blue Lake. When the Columbia River basalt group flows moved across the landscape, they buried forests. The wood was engulfed rapidly enough that silica-rich groundwater percolating through the cooling basalt replaced the organic wood tissue molecule by molecule with silica over thousands of years, preserving cellular structure in 3 dimensions. The petrified logs at Ginkgo are exposed in the basalt cliff faces above the Columbia River near the town of Vantage, where erosion has cut through the flows and revealed the preserved material in cross-section. The park's interpretive trail at Wanapum Overlook sits above the Columbia River, at a point where the river cuts through the basalt sequence. The view downstream encompasses the I-90 bridge at Vantage and the Wanapum Dam Reservoir, the full layering of time visible in one sweep: Miocene basalt, Miocene forest entombed in it, a mid-20th century dam, and the freeway moving across all of it. The Wanapum people, whose name translates roughly as river people, occupied the Columbia River corridor at Vantage for thousands of years, fishing for salmon and drawing petroglyphs on the basalt faces above the river. The construction of Wanapum Dam in 1963 flooded the Wanapum's primary village site and the lower portion of the petroglyph panels. A selection of the carvings were removed to higher ground before the reservoir filled. The relocated panels are displayed at the park's Heritage Center. The interior of the park's Heritage Center holds cut and polished cross-sections of the petrified logs, showing preserved growth rings, ray cells, and, in some specimens, intact bark texture. The cellular detail in a 15-million-year-old ginkgo specimen, cut to reveal the same ring structure as a living tree, makes the species' continuity across geological time tangible in a way that text alone cannot. We stay in the Columbia Plateau and follow the Snake River southeast to a waterfall that drops into a canyon that should not exist. Palouse Falls drops 198 feet into a circular plunge pool at the bottom of a basalt canyon, a vertical drop higher than Niagara Falls by about 20 feet. The Palouse River runs through an otherwise unremarkable agricultural plain before reaching the canyon, then falls abruptly into it, as though the plateau simply gave way. The canyon was not carved by the Palouse River. It was carved by the Missoula floods. The floods moved southwest across the Columbia Plateau, and one major flood lobe moved down what is now the Palouse River Canyon before the smaller river that occupies the canyon today ever existed. The floods cut the canyon into the Columbia River basalt group in a period of catastrophic erosion that lasted decades across the flood episodes. When the floods ended, the Palouse River, which drains the agricultural Palouse Hills to the north, inherited the canyon and has been flowing through it ever since. The river is too small for the canyon. The mismatch in scale between the waterway and the walls enclosing it is immediately obvious. The plunge pool at the base of the falls is a scour hole from flood hydraulics, not from the modest river currently using it. The basalt at Palouse Falls is exceptionally well displayed. The canyon walls show the full columnar joint structure of multiple individual Columbia River basalt group flows stacked on top of each other, each flow marked by its rubbly vesicular top, its columnar middle, and its dense base. Counting the flows visible in a single wall section, you are reading time directly. Each flow is a discrete geological event, separated from the next by a surface that may represent thousands of years of exposure between eruptions. Palouse Falls became Washington's official state waterfall in 2014 after a campaign led by a high school civics class in Sumner, a fact that earns its place here because it is the kind of civic mechanism that rarely leaves any trace in a landscape, but is exactly how most official designations come to exist. The falls are accessible from a small state park on the canyon rim, with a trail descending partway to a lower viewpoint. Swimming in the plunge pool is prohibited. The hydraulics at the base of the falls include strong recirculating currents. Peregrine falcons nest on the canyon walls. White-throated swifts move through the canyon in tight, fast arcs, feeding on the insect concentration above the plunge pool. The cliff faces hold canyon wrens, whose descending trill carries clearly above the fall's noise, a song that sounds like something rolling downhill in half steps. We leave the Columbia Plateau and turn west, back into the Cascades, to find a volcano that defines the horizon of an entire region. Mount Rainier is 14,411 feet tall and holds more glacial ice than any other peak in the contiguous United States, roughly 35 square miles of glacier surface divided among 26 named glaciers. It is the most heavily glaciated volcano in the lower 48, and it sits 54 miles southeast of Seattle, close enough that it appears on clear days from downtown as something that seems to exist in a different atmospheric layer than the rest of the landscape. The peak generates its own weather. It intercepts Pacific moisture from the southwest and forces it upward, producing snowfall accumulations at Paradise, the visitor hub on the mountain's southern flank at 5,400 feet, that once set the world record for annual snowfall in a single season, 1,224 inches, recorded in 1971 to 72. The volcano is a composite stratovolcano built on older metamorphic basement rock, with a summit cone composed of alternating lava flows, ash deposits, and volcanic breccia accumulated over roughly the past 500,000 years. The current summit structure is younger. The cone above 10,000 feet represents construction over the past 100,000 years. Mount Rainier is considered one of the world's most dangerous volcanoes not primarily because of eruption probability, but because of its lahar hazard. The mountain's enormous ice and glacier volume, combined with its history of flank collapses driven by hydrothermal alteration of the rock interior, means that even a modest eruption could generate lahars, volcanic debris flows mixed with meltwater, moving down the Puyallup, White, Carbon, and Nisqually River valleys at speeds up to 50 miles per hour. Several populated river valley communities sit within lahar inundation zones. The USGS operates a lahar detection sensor network on the mountain specifically because the warning time for communities downstream could be as little as 30 to 40 minutes. The wildflower meadows at Paradise and Sunrise, the eastern visitor area at 6,400 feet on the mountain's north flank, are among the most photographed subalpine landscapes in Washington. The meadows bloom sequentially from late July through August as snowmelt exposes progressively higher terrain, first avalanche lily, then lupine, paintbrush, and fleabane. Hoary marmots call from the talus above the meadow edge. Their alarm whistle is sharp and single-noted, audible from several hundred yards. Clark's nutcrackers work the whitebark pine stands at tree line, caching pine seeds in soil caches they will locate under several feet of snow through spatial memory. The Nisqually, Puyallup, Muckleshoot, and Yakama peoples all recognized Mount Rainier as a significant spiritual landmark. The Puyallup name for the peak, Tahoma or Tacoma, translates roughly as the mountain that was God, or Mother of Waters, the latter referring to the rivers originating from its glaciers. Explorers gave it its current name in 1792, when British naval officer George Vancouver named it after his friend Rear Admiral Peter Rainier, who, as a historical footnote, never visited the Pacific Northwest. Mount Rainier National Park was established in 1899, making it the 5th national park in the United States. The Paradise Inn, a large craftsman-style lodge built in 1916 of Alaska cedar, still operates on the mountain's south flank. Its log truss ceiling beams, hand-split cedar shingles, and stone fireplaces are intact. The building has survived a century of winters under snow loads that occasionally exceed 30 feet on the roof. 28 miles to the southwest, a different volcano tells the story not of what a mountain can become, but of what it becomes when it collapses. On the morning of May 18, 1980, at 8:32 a.m., Mount St. Helens erupted in the largest volcanic event in the recorded history of the contiguous United States. The eruption was preceded by 2 months of seismic activity and a visible bulge on the volcano's north flank that had grown to 450 feet in diameter. A magnitude 5.1 earthquake triggered the collapse of that bulge in a debris avalanche, the largest landslide ever recorded, which traveled at speeds up to 155 miles per hour and buried 24 square miles of the North Fork Toutle River Valley under an average depth of 150 feet of debris. The lateral blast that followed the landslide flattened 230 square miles of forest in less than 3 minutes. The eruption column reached 80,000 feet into the atmosphere. 57 people were killed, including volcanologist David Johnston and innkeeper Harry Truman, who had refused to evacuate his lodge on Spirit Lake. What makes Mount St. Helens scientifically significant beyond the event itself is what happened afterward. The monument preserves the blast zone, and the recovery of biological communities across it has been studied continuously for over 4 decades, one of the longest-running ecological succession datasets in North America. The pattern of recovery revealed mechanisms that ecologists had not predicted. Pocket gophers, living in burrows below the snowpack, survived in areas where all surface life was destroyed, and their burrowing mixed buried organic soil with the sterile volcanic ash, accelerating plant recolonization from below. Lupine colonized bare pumice plains early because its root nodules fix atmospheric nitrogen, establishing soil chemistry that allowed other species to follow. Prairie falcons and northern harriers moved into the open blast zone within years because the absence of forest created the open hunting habitat they prefer. The current state of the blast zone is a mosaic. Mature alder stands in the wet draws, recovering conifer forest on the better-drained slopes, and bare pumice flats, where the volcanic deposit is deep enough that soil formation is still decades away. Spirit Lake, partly blocked by the debris avalanche dam, still holds a log mat from the trees blown into it in 1980. The logs have not sunk. They are still there. The Johnston Ridge Observatory, named for David Johnston, sits at 4,314 feet on the crater's north rim, the position Johnston occupied when he radioed his last transmission. The observatory faces directly into the crater and the lava dome that has been growing inside it since 1980. The dome now stands at roughly 925 feet above the crater floor and continues to deform slowly. Less than 2 miles south of the crater, a geological feature from the 1980 eruption offers a different kind of descent. Ape Cave is the third longest lava tube in North America. 13,042 feet of navigable passage beneath the southern flank of Mount St. Helens. It formed roughly 1,900 years ago during a basaltic lava flow, when the outer surface of the flow cooled and solidified, while molten rock continued flowing through the interior. When the eruption ended and the lava drained, the hardened shell remained as a hollow tube. The cave has 2 sections, the lower tube, which is broad and relatively flat-floored, and the upper tube, which requires scrambling over lava falls, ledges where the lava surface stepped down during flow, and navigating sections where the floor is rough, broken, and uneven. The temperature inside Ape Cave is a constant 42 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of outside conditions. In summer, the temperature differential between the outside air and the cave interior produces a cold draft at the entrance that is immediately noticeable. The walls are dark basalt, the surface textures varying between smooth lava cycles small stalactite-like drips of lava that solidified on the ceiling, and rough vesicular rock where gas bubbles were trapped during cooling. In several sections, the lava ball features characteristic of high-velocity tube flow appear. Rounded masses of lava that rolled along the tube floor when the flow was active and came to rest against the walls when flow stopped. The cave holds no permanent resident vertebrate population. The temperature and the absence of food sources limit what can live there permanently. Townsend's big-eared bats use the cave for hibernation in winter. The bats enter a state of torpor in which their heart rate drops from several hundred beats per minute to fewer than 20, and their body temperature approaches the ambient cave temperature. Disturbing hibernating Townsend's big-eared bats is specifically regulated under both federal and state law because the energy cost of arousal from torpor is significant enough that repeated disturbance can exhaust fat reserves and kill the animal before spring. The cave is named after the Mount St. Helens Apes, a local hiking club active in the 1940s, not after Bigfoot, though the Mount St. Helens area is historically associated with Bigfoot sighting reports, particularly a 1924 incident involving miners and thrown rocks at a site called Ape Canyon, adjacent to the current monument. The miners' account was widely reported and contributed to the early Pacific Northwest Bigfoot mythology. The canyon's name predates the hiking clubs, and the cave's name derives from the canyons. We drop west from the volcano and follow the Columbia River to the oldest permanent American settlement west of the Rocky Mountains. Fort Vancouver was established by the Hudson's Bay Company in 1825 on the north bank of the Columbia River, near the confluence of the Willamette, as the administrative center of the company's entire Pacific Northwest fur trade operation. At its peak in the 1830s and 1840s, the fort was the economic, social, and supply hub for an area stretching from Russian Alaska to Spanish California, and from the Pacific coast to the Rocky Mountains. Everything west of the mountains flowed through it, furs out, manufactured goods in, with the company's express canoe brigades running schedules that connected Fort Vancouver to Montreal in a matter of months. The fort occupied a strategic site. The Columbia was navigable by ocean-going vessels to this point. The Willamette Valley immediately south provided agricultural capacity, and the elevation above the river's seasonal floodline gave the compound protection. Chief Factor John McLaughlin, who ran the fort from 1825 to 1846, expanded the operation to include a sawmill, a flour mill, a shipyard, and a farm complex covering several thousand acres. The farm fed the fort community of several hundred people, company employees, their indigenous and mixed heritage families, Hawaiian workers called Kanakas, recruited by the company in Hawaii, and a rotating population of trappers, missionaries, and American overland emigrants. The reconstructed fort, National Park Service, managed since 1948, presents the 1845 period, when the fort was at its operational peak and the Oregon boundary settlement with Britain was still a year away. The reconstruction used the original company surveys and excavation data to position and dimension the buildings accurately. The main house, The trade shop, the bakehouse, and the bastion are reconstructed on or near their original footprints. The trade shop's inventory, beaver pelts, muskets, blankets, iron tools, reflects the actual trade goods documented in company records. Archaeology beneath the site continues. Excavation seasons since the 1940s have recovered over 2 million artifacts, including indigenous trade goods, personal items from fort residents of a dozen different cultural backgrounds, and evidence of the fort's multicultural daily life that the company's formal records largely omit. The site is surrounded by the Vancouver urban area, and the juxtaposition is historically accurate. Vancouver, Washington, grew directly from the Fort Vancouver supply community. The U.S. Army's Vancouver Barracks, established immediately adjacent to the fort in 1849, is part of the same historic site. General Ulysses S. Grant was stationed here as a young lieutenant. The Oregon Trail terminus was within walking distance. The Columbia River is still visible from the fort stockade, the same river McLaughlin watched the brigade canoes on in the 1830s, though the grain barges that use it now move at a different pace. We head north, back into the foothills of the Cascades, where a small town and a waterfall complete the journey. Snoqualmie sits at the base of the Cascade foothills in the upper Snoqualmie Valley, and the town's identity has been shaped by two industries that arrived in the same decade, logging and rail, and by a third, much older relationship with the valley that predates both. The Snoqualmie tribe, whose name translates roughly as People of the Moon, occupied the Snoqualmie Valley and the adjacent passes for thousands of years. Snoqualmie Pass, at 3,010 feet, is the lowest crossing through the Cascades in Washington, and Snoqualmie used it as the primary route between the western lowlands and the Columbia Plateau. The pass served the same function for the Northern Pacific Railroad when it was surveyed in the 1870s, and for Interstate 90 today. The town's historic core reflects its late 19th century timber economy. The Snoqualmie Valley Railroad, established in 1889, was built to haul timber out of the Upper Valley, and the original depot, a craftsman-style building from 1890, still stands and serves as the headquarters of the Northwest Railway Museum, which operates vintage steam train excursions on weekends between Snoqualmie and North Bend. The steam locomotives in the museum's collection include equipment dating to the 1910s, some of the engines that worked the Cascades timber industry during its peak period. The sound of a working steam locomotive in the Snoqualmie depot, the pressure release, the mechanical rhythm, the particular smell of coal smoke and hot iron, is a sensory artifact of an industry that cleared most of the old-growth forest in this valley within 50 years of the railroad's arrival. The upper Snoqualmie Valley retains its agricultural character in the lower terraces. The valley floor is underlain by alluvial and glacial outwash deposits from the Fraser Glaciation, the last major glacial advance into the Puget Lowland, which peaked roughly 16,000 years ago. These deposits produce the flat, fertile bottomland that dairy farms have occupied since the 1880s. The Snoqualmie tribe received federal recognition in 1999 after decades of petitioning. The tribe's cultural center and administrative offices now operate in the Snoqualmie area, and the Snoqualmie Falls, a mile north of the town center, are considered sacred by the Snoqualmie people. The falls are the site where, in their cosmology, the first people were created by the transformer figure Dukwi-Bahal. Logging, the Puget Sound Power and Light Company's tunnel and powerhouse built directly into the cliff in 1898, and the resort hotel on the rim were all developed without consultation with Snoqualmie. The tribe's presence is now part of the site's formal interpretation. The town's current economy is tourist and commuter-driven. Seattle is about 30 miles west, close enough that Snoqualmie functions partly as a bedroom community. The historic downtown, the railway museum, and the proximity of Snoqualmie Falls keep a steady visitor flow through the year. 1 mile north, the valley ends at a cliff. Snoqualmie Falls drops 268 feet, nearly twice the height of Niagara, over a basalt and andesite cliff face into a deep plunge pool at the base of a narrow canyon. The Snoqualmie River above the falls is broad and unhurried, moving through a flat valley floor with no visible indication that the ground is about to disappear. The change is abrupt. The river reaches the canyon rim and drops. The mist produced by the falls rises above the canyon and is visible from the SR-202 approach well before the falls themselves come into view. The sound at the lower viewpoint, a short trail descending to a platform within about 300 feet of the base, is physical, a sustained, low-frequency concussion that you feel in the chest. The geology of the falls is the contact between two different rock types. The upper falls, the main vertical drop, are over a resistant basalt flow. The lower canyon, where the river moves after the plunge pool, cuts through softer and acidic volcanic material. The differential resistance between the two rock types is part of what maintains the fall's vertical face. The basalt holds, while the material downstream erodes more readily. The canyon below the falls is narrow and steep-walled, the rock face dark and wet with spray throughout the year. In winter, ice formations build on the canyon walls where seep water freezes. Snoqualmie Falls has been generating electricity since 1899. The Puget Sound Power and Light Company bored a tunnel through the cliff and installed turbines in a powerhouse at the base, fed by a portion of the river's flow, diverted at the rim. The powerhouse is still operating. It is the oldest underground powerhouse in North America, still in commercial use, generating about 55 megawatts, enough to power roughly 15,000 homes. The tunnel entrance is visible from the lower viewpoint. The infrastructure is entirely inside the cliff, which is why the fall's visual face is unaltered despite over a century of power generation. The Salish Lodge, built on the rim directly above the falls in the 1980s, replacing an earlier structure, operates as a resort and spa. The building sits close enough to the rim that the falls are audible in the guest rooms. The lodge became internationally known when it was used as the exterior of the Great Northern Hotel in the television series Twin Peaks, filmed partly on location in the Snoqualmie Valley in the early 1990s. The filming brought a persistent tourism layer to the valley that outlasted the show's original run by decades. The diner in North Bend that served as the Double R Diner, the Salish Lodge exterior, and several locations in the surrounding forest still draw visitors specifically for the association. The Snoqualmie people regard the falls as the center of their world, not metaphorically but specifically as the site from which human life on the Snoqualmie watershed originated. The sound of the falls carries up the valley and downstream through the canyon. It has been continuous here at roughly this volume for as long as the river has run. We started at the edge of the continent where the Pacific Ocean runs out of room and the basalt cliffs of Cape Flattery absorb the energy of three converging water bodies. We end at a waterfall that has been running for the same length of time this valley has existed, long enough that the Snoqualmie people organized their cosmology around it. Between those 2 points, Washington laid out a compressed version of the continent's geological history. The accretionary wedge of the Olympic Peninsula, ocean floor, scraped off a subducting plate and piled against the continent over 50 million years, sits within 100 miles of the Columbia River basalt group, which buried a rhinoceros in lava 15 million years ago and entombed a subtropical forest that contained ginkgo trees. The same ice sheets that carved Lake Chelan's basin 400 feet below sea level also released, in their melting, floods that carved dry falls and the channeled scablands in a matter of days. Mount St. Helens reminded everyone in 1980 that the Cascades are not finished mountains. Mount Rainier is holding 35 square miles of glacier on an active volcano 54 miles from a major city. What sits underneath all of it, beneath the elk herds in the Hoh, the turquoise water of Diablo Lake, the petrified wood at Vantage, the Rhino cast in a basalt ceiling, is a continent that arrived here in pieces, assembled over geological time from material originating elsewhere, and is still being sorted. The Maka still hold their treaty right to the whale. The Snoqualmie still hold the falls as the center of their world. The island marble, butterfly thought extinct for a century, is still flying over the prairie at American Camp. The oldest underground powerhouse in North America is still running inside the cliff at Snoqualmie. Washington rewards the kind of attention that requires slowing down. That is Washington State, from the Pacific headland to the basalt plateau, from active volcanoes to Miocene forests preserved in rock. Every place we stopped had layers that took decades of science, centuries of indigenous knowledge or simple geological time to produce. If that kind of depth is what you come to Era Trails for, subscribe and stay with us. The archive goes deep, and we are not slowing down. Next, we are heading further into the Pacific Northwest, a region where temperate rainforest meets ancient volcanic geography and some of the most complex indigenous cultural histories in North America. We will be following rivers that salmon built ecosystems around, standing inside forests where the trees predate most European nations, and tracing a coastline that has been continuously inhabited for over 10,000 years. The story continues.